afternoon. Thank you for joining us. You're at the Technology Source virtual roundtable with our special guests, TPX. We are going to be talking about cybersecurity today. So we'll give our audience a few minutes to trickle in. I see everyone getting into the room right now. Good morning, good afternoon. Please let us know where you are dialing in from today. And I don't know, maybe what the weather's like here in Northern California. It's smoky. We have fires all around us, but it is beautiful sunny day. Can't complain. Little tiny bit of smoke. Hi in sunny Whittier, California. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to those of us who joined. You're on the Technology Source virtual roundtable. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. So, Anguilla, quite sunny and warm. Hi in LA, hi in San Francisco, hi in Seattle. Nice and sunny there, that's good for you. Good morning. Good morning, thank you for joining us. Get started in just a few. Hello in Orlando, a little windy there. Hi in Silicon Valley, good morning. Get started here in just about 30 more seconds, thank you. Good morning in Mountain View. Well, while you're greeting us, which I so appreciate, I will introduce myself really quick. Sonia Moline, Vice President with Technology Source, coming up on 2 years with this wonderful organization that works with over 500 different providers to bring to you the best solutions for your organization, from cybersecurity to disaster recovery, data backup, voice communications, just the list goes on. And so we're happy here today to have a returning guest. We have TPX and our team here from TPX, who I'll introduce in just a few seconds. I did want to let you know we do have a fun giveaway. So when you ask a question, I'll put your name into the bowl. And if you get your name drawn at the very end, you'll get a $50 gift card that is from TPX. So thank you for sponsoring that drawing. So I will introduce our guest today, who's going to be talking to us about cybersecurity. And wouldn't you know it, that's Mr. Jonathan Goldberger, a returning speaker here. He is the SVP of Security Practice and Strategic Sales with TPX Communications. Where are you calling us in from today, Jonathan?
I'm outside of DC, where today I think we're supposed to be like 95, nice and humid. One of those days where you go outside, check the mail, and you lose about 10 pounds just walking there.
Oh, fun. Great. Well, thank you for making it today. I know our audience, as it's growing, there's still people coming in, so we'll get started. And thank you for joining us again. Today, the way this is going to go is Jonathan is going to give us a deep dive into some security stats and things that we need to know. And then from there, throughout this entire presentation, please ask questions. So any questions, if you ask a question and we use it, you will get your name in the drawing, just like we usually do. So Jonathan, I'll let you take it away from there.
All right, great. Well, listen, thanks so much for the opportunity. Thank you for taking the time out of your all's days. And what we really want to get out of today is to get through all the FUD. You know, there's fear out there associated with security. There's always uncertainty and certainly doubt that vendors try to drive. But what really do we need to worry about from a security perspective? And so I'm going to share with you some slides, and we'll have a nice little conversation about this. If at any point you do have any questions, just let me know. And just real quick, Sonia, do you see one slide, or do you see the
yeah, perfect view. We see the one slide. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, let's get started. So real fast, you know, we're right around lunchtime here on the East Coast. Hopefully for those out on the West Coast, you had some of this, which is JBS, the largest meat processor who make bacon. They make bacon, which we all love and we desire to have, but the bacon issue is something that's very relevant to security. Because when JBS was hit with ransomware, there was concern about how long an organization like a meat processor could go down before it would affect getting bacon in the grocery stores. And I like to believe that if there's one way to get attention of Americans, It's affect their bacon, literally and figuratively. But then you've got gas, and I love to go everywhere. If anybody was on with us from the East Coast, you experienced when Colonial had their ransomware attack, it affected gas availability on pretty much the Southeast. Now, a good portion of that was because everybody and their mother went out to go get gas at that moment because they were all so afraid that there wasn't going to be gas. But it shows how, again, ransomware and security was affecting the daily fabric of our lives. But then you've got the folks who live in the Northeast who just wanted to get away on a weekend, take the Cape Cod ferry, go on over to the island and just enjoy a weekend. And that's what happened here, where ransomware affected the ferry service ability to actually transfer passengers, and therefore they shut down. You know, security is no longer a conversation about acronyms and products and something that only affects a chief information security officer or someone really technical. Security is now affecting all of us every day because these folks are capitalists. They just want to make some money, and they're doing it in a modern pirate manner called ransomware. Now, with security being so prevalent of a need, the vendor landscape has exploded. And it's exploded to the point where, from a user perspective, from an organizational leadership perspective, you just don't know where to get started. You don't know which of all these different vendors that are calling me, telling me that their security solution is the solution for you, the most important solution for you. And so for many folks, they just go, I can't tell heads from tails on this. Everybody's saying the same thing. It's a lot easier to just do nothing. And so they do nothing. So what's the real approach? How do we go about this so that organizations can truly improve their security, but not get lost in all of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt? Well, it's interesting. We at TPX sat down with our customers and we just asked them, what is their pain? Not what I think it is as a vendor, but what's really the pain, and not a specific thing, but more importantly, which type of which aspect of security, which group or pain point in your organization is the most painful? Is it audit, compliance, government? This is like third-party audit, internal audit, regulatory. Is that what's really driving the security pain? Is it the user? You and me, ones that are just sitting here typing away at our computers, trying to go to freesoftware.com and just download malware? Or is it the leadership? You know, those folks who go away on the weekend, they start reading news articles from Fox Business News or the Wall Street Journal, and they send you an email on Monday morning saying, how are we protected from this? Perhaps it's just those external threats, the things like ransomware, or maybe it's something else. What is the biggest priority from a security perspective, the greatest pain for you? Because there's one thing that makes me cringe when I talk with my sales folks and talking to customers. It's what keeps you up at night. That phrase drives me nuts. Because if somebody asks me that, I'll usually say it has something to do with a relationship, my kids, or sadly enough, my golf score. It's those things that actually keep me up. It's not going to be that vulnerability scan and not knowing what the results are. And so what's really important is understanding what drives the pain for an organization. And surprisingly, the number one thing is executives. It's executives because it's so hard to communicate the value of security solutions in terms that resonate for executives. And those terms are really dollars and cents, with the sense being what makes sense. The second greatest pain were the users themselves. We cause all the problems. That's like an absolute fact of securing a business. The user is who often introduces the problem. And then the third is actually that external threat, like ransomware. Now, I think one of the reasons that the external threat is the third priority is that's the one we have the most control over. As in, we can put in security controls for that. We can patch a system for that. There's a very set way and defined way to alleviate the external threat. Whereas users and executives, well, it's a lot more gray there. So I'm interested, I'd love to see from your perspective, what do you think? So from your perspective in your organization, what do you see is the greatest threat, or real pain, I should say, the greatest pain for you? Is it executives? Is it users? What do you say? And I'd ask you to just throw it into that chat.
Let's see what people say here. Users. Straight to that. Getting more of that. All right. Naming some certain regions like China. External, so that would go in there with the external threats and the users.
The other thing that really surprised me in this was compliance didn't come up more. You know, for a lot.
I was going to say, for me, it was a lot of compliance, just because that was partly my role.
Yeah.
In healthcare, it's like, oh my gosh, the burden.
Exactly. Exactly.
Users' interaction with external threats. That's a good one. That's kind of both.
Well, great. This is helpful. You know, I think as you break down security and cybersecurity, and you look at it from a perspective of really who's driving that pain, that's an important piece. Because as you look at solutions for an organization, it should be alleviating your greatest pain. And therefore, there's different solutions for executives, different solutions for users, different solutions from a threat perspective. And so if we look at this further, let's talk about that. Like, how do you really communicate to an executive the value of cybersecurity when they don't understand cybersecurity? You know, how do you get started there? And that's where there's two things that I like to highlight. The first is the value of having assessments done. Now, different organizations need to have different assessments. It's really based on what you do. But universally, when you think of security, and how do you get a roadmap of security? And how do you ensure that that roadmap is aligned with the budget constraints that an organization has? It's really important to have an external third-party view that's to an industry standard. And I'd recommend using NIST 800 unless you're an international company, and then you go with ISO 27000, but 27001. But if you're a domestic only or primarily domestic, I would go with the NIST standard. Have that third-party assessment done to ensure that those hotspots, you get that heat map, those hotspots are identified, and you can align those hotspots, whether it's, let's say, web application security, or perhaps it's associated with operationalizing your perimeter security. Those hotspots can be aligned to business objectives. That is, let's say, business being tied to your web application that's available. Or perhaps it's tied to processing POs and processing payments. Being able to align the gaps with the solutions that are affected can drive then the monies and understanding the threat to the business. So it starts with getting that assessment done to best practice and getting that heat map so that you can align it to the business. But it also is tied to very actionable things that are relevant to the executive team. As an example, there's a very clear way to protect from ransomware. And as we all know, ransomware is reported every single day in all the different publications. And so knowing how an organization is protected, just getting that high level view so that you have a defensible statement to your executive team, that's what's really helpful. And defensibility is something I always come back to in security. We all want a defensible position. We want it in life. I want it with my wife as it pertains to the anniversary gift, if you will. I want it with my work and job that I do associated with the effort that we're taking. We want to be defensible. And having something like a ransomware evaluation where you can see in a 30-minute conversation what the state is associated with the big high-level means of ransomware executing gives you some of that defensibility. That defensibility through third party, that defensibility through having that heat map and that report, that then speaks to executives. But what do you do associated with those users? Because I heard time and again, you know, Kenneth mentioned it, that users are an issue, as did John. You know, the user is really what's introducing it. Jason, you mentioned it as well. I actually think that users are the biggest challenge, personally. That's my take. And the reason is because we always introduce the problem. Now, what you have to do is you really need to get these users to be as much security champions as possible. So I got another question for you. How do you make users security champions? What do you do?
What does our audience say about this?
And you're not getting off easy. I'm not going to just keep
All right.
on moving through the presentation.
Michael says we have champions in each section and each department. Users interact together. You educate them, says Erwin. That's a good one. Position them to be a part of the solution. That's a really good one.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'm hearing educate. Tony says have them educated on threats. So, and then that goes with one of our questions, holding them accountable, says Michael. Accountability, that's a good one. It's part of everyone's job description. Right. What else? I'm seeing some good ones. We did have a question that kind of goes along with this, and that was this was from Cal. Cal, I already put your name in the bowl. And Kenneth says seminars. Cal's question was, what are the biggest threats? His organization was curious about that.
Yeah, we're going to get.
We just talked about one of them when I saw ransomware.
Yeah, there's specific vulnerability threats that exist, and I'm a big fan of realistic risk, because if you live in the security landscape, the threat landscape, there's thousands of threats, and every threat has risk tied to it. But I care about my threats to my business based on that vulnerability being available to execute. So that means, is there code in the wild that can take advantage of it? And is that threat, that system that is weakened, is that visible for the external threat? Or does it require something very specific and unique, like I need to be on the network? So I try to measure the vulnerability to the likelihood of it actually executing. And then there's got to be a consequence. So you basically have the vulnerability, the likelihood of it occurring, and the consequence. And these are all multiplied. This is the threat equation. These are all multiplied. And if any of these are zero, your risk is zero. As in, if there's a threat out there for a vulnerability on a Linux server, but we're all Windows, then I don't have it within my organization. Right.
So it depends. That's the answer.
It depends. But I'm going to talk about
answers to your questions here. Education, says Jeff, and real-time testing, phishing tests, role-playing with social engineering situations, creating a culture of knowledge and questioning, relentless effort and commitment to improving user knowledge and expertise. And then there's some more questions, but I think those were good answers to the user's question. Yeah.
So let's move on with that. And I'm going to come back to the question, Sonia. You just pipe in and we can answer or ask some of those other questions. But Jeff, what you said out of all of that in there, the one that was really important is a relentless effort and commitment. That's what it takes. Think about golf. I mentioned before that my golf score is what keeps me up at night. It would be great if I could go to the driving range on some odd Tuesday in January, hit a small bucket of balls and become a scratch golfer. But it doesn't work that way. That's crazy. That's insane, loco crazy. But yet for a lot of organizations, they train their users once a year on security. They have a 30-minute video that they ask them to watch. And for whatever reason, we think that, yes, this is going to make an impact. Now, for all of you, you probably recognize that as well. And you think this is crazy. We're not going to make them security champions that way. And so there's other things that inhibit that from occurring. But it's that relentless effort that's so important. And so what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to move users from a stage of awareness that is incompetent, whether they unconsciously, they have no idea how much they don't know, or consciously, they know that they don't know something. We want to shift them from incompetence to competence. And to shift them to competence, it requires time and it requires training. Ultimately, we want to get people to consciously competent, where they know something. They have to think about it, but they know it. So that when that phishing email comes in, they go, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm getting an Instagram reset email on my work account. I don't have an Instagram account with my work email address. I don't think this is kosher. That's where we want to get people to. Ultimately, we want to get them to the Michael Jordan method, which is unconsciously competent. They don't even have to think about it. They just go, nah, keep going. To get there, it takes time and it takes effort. And so with regards to security awareness training, that time and effort is about having a continuous security awareness training program. A program where you incorporate monthly, I like to say TikTok style training modules, not 20 minutes, not 30 minutes, but 5 minutes, 6 minutes that hits one of many security topics. For example, a lot of people forget that your social media is used against you when it comes to spear phishing. Because the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to investigate, what do you like? What are you posting about? If you're posting about all the barbecue you do on the weekends, I'm going to send you an attachment and a message that has to do with barbecue to try to get you to download the malware or to get it where you give me your credentials. I'm going to use that knowledge. And so we want to train people every month so that security is staying top of mind. And then we want to practice it. We want to test them on it. We want to send them the phishing exercises so that they're continually applying this information. And you want it where this occurs automatically, reporting occurs automatically, so that it becomes easy for the organization to maintain that relentless effort and commitment to improving their knowledge. Jeff, you hit it spot on. That was a fabulous answer to that question. And it's probably our biggest challenge associated with user training is getting the organization to recognize it's got to be relentless and continuous. Now, the users themselves, if you can get them there, that's great. And we see it every day at TPX, where the greatest ROI in security is security awareness training, because it costs the least and it has the greatest impact. There was another question here, and I'm just going to go ahead and read that if that's all right, Sonia. We've got there. Is there any reason why one company is chosen over another to be hacked? Tony, that's a great question. And it's a great question because for a lot of folks, they go, I'm not a target. I'm too small. I'm too regional. I don't have a big enough internet presence. I'm not a target. I don't have to worry about it. The problem is that all of us are connected into the same internet. And the way that these capitalists, these pirates, the way that they work is they just cast a wide net. They cast a wide net, and it's broken down where they don't really, they aren't necessarily targeting you individually. They might be targeting a segment like state and local government, or they might be targeting a segment like healthcare, or they could just be targeting a group of email addresses in a phishing campaign. They don't care who bites. They just want the bite. And once they get the bite, they get into the network and they look to see what they can find. If they can mine data that they can sell on the black market, they do that. If they can get further credentials to then connect to other companies through your business partnerships, they will do that. And then they'll go and hold your business hostage. And that's where ransomware comes in. On average, organizations organizations that are ransomed had the attackers in their environment for 17 days before the ransomware executed. And that's just ransomware alone. You've got these big name activities where the malicious users are in there for months at a time. And they get in there because of one of the key problems is they're coming in with compromised credentials. And so they look like a valid user. So Tony, the question there of, is there any reason why one company is chosen over another? It's sort of like, is there one reason that a car is broken in more likely than another? In some cases, it's the user. They go park it in a dark alley, or they park it in somewhere where they leave materials out on the dashboard or in the seat. In other cases, it might be the type of car. You know, they are a car that has a high value for their parts in the black market. And so there's some things that we can do to reduce our risk. And then there's some things we've got to recognize are part of our risk in the company and the work that we do. So let's get into that in real detail, because ransomware has all this associated with it, but there's some other pieces associated here. Let's first focus on how does it occur. There are three key vectors of attack. 98% of ransomware attacks come in these three ways. First, it's external remote services, 52% in 2020. These are remote services like remote administration. It's like remote access to the network. And these remote services are usually where they come in. The way you protect against that, well, geez, this is where you operationalize securing your perimeter. You got to have managed detection and response. You got to have vulnerability management. This is where you scan your perimeter to make sure that no ports are open that aren't necessary. If you're going to allow someone to connect to the network remotely, make sure that you have multi-factor authentication enabled. You have to. It's an absolute in this modern era. Having multi-factor authentication makes it where even if the credentials are stolen, they can't connect remotely without that MFA. And then obviously you got to have a firewall that's a next generation firewall. And in that next generation firewall, you want to incorporate managed detection and response. Now, managed detection and response means a couple different things to a couple different people. Marketing's gotten a hold of it. But to make it really simple of what managed detection and response is, I'll use a metaphor for you. Because managed detection and response is managed services, but it has the remediation piece of it. In the past, when we did managed services, we would manage a device. And then when we detected something, we'd send you a notification associated with it. Well, for most users, you'd end up being like the little kid in the McDonald's playland, where you're just drowning in little colored balls of different threats that have been emailed to you, the different alerts. So managed services got smarter. They said, we could do better. Customers demanded more, and they came up with managed detection and response. And I look at that R of response is remediation. If we think of it like babysitting, babysitting is just a managed service. You're just managing my kid, watching them while I'm away. Managed services from a babysitting perspective, legacy is like this. Hello, Mr. Goldberger. Yes, this is Sam. I'm watching your son. I just wanted you to know that Johnny, he got a hold of some scissors. He's running around the neighborhood right now chasing the cat. Enjoy dinner. Right there, you get that managed, and you get to detect the threat, and I'm letting you know. Now I got to run home from dinner and interrupt my date and try to find Johnny before he does something terrible to the cat. Now with managed detection and response, it's a little bit different. That same scenario. Mr. Goldberger, hi, this is Sam, your babysitter. Just want you to know, yeah, Johnny, he got a hold of some scissors, but don't you worry, he's fine. I coaxed the scissors with him by trading him a lollipop for the scissors. I also took the rest of the scissors that were in the drawer. I pulled those out, and that knife block that you got on the counter, I moved that and I put it way high up in the cupboard. He's great. When you come home, you probably need to go over that with him about how scissors are bad. You shouldn't run around with them, and also find a better place for them. Enjoy dinner. See, in that scenario, we get the remediation. My problem is resolved. And then I just need to do some follow-up work to make sure that it doesn't happen occur. For organizations to really be protected, you need to make sure if you use managed services, use managed detection and response, where that response is remediation. It's because there's two incredibly important stats for security: time to detect and time to respond. And if you detect something, but it takes you 6 hours to respond, you're in trouble. But if you detect something, it takes you 15 minutes, you likely are eliminating the threat and preventing it from escalating. That's for 52% of your attacks. The next is 29% for phishing. And this is where that that security awareness training is so important. But it's not only that, you also need to make sure that endpoints have true endpoint detection and response with that managed detection and response. And by that, I mean, you want code on your endpoint that detects the behavior of the malware, not signature based, not even heuristic based, but truly what is the malware doing? And by that, it's this example. When you have a phished email that comes in, if your user didn't pick it up, but instead clicked on an attachment, for example, and that attachment opens up Word, and embedded in that Word attachment is a command shell to run a get HTTP request to go out to the web and go to a server and pull down malware. And next, that when it pulls down that malware, the code is going to store the file deep within the Windows directory structure and name the folder a bunch of letters and numbers that are just random. Now, the behavior of that malware is very, very different than the behavior of me or you. When I download something off the internet, I'm most likely downloading it directly from Chrome, but it could happen where there's something embedded in Word, and yes, that may occur. But it's more what happens next. When I save something, I save it on the desktop or in documents or in a folder I call photos or documents for boss. I want to be able to get to that information, and so I store it in that manner. True endpoint detection and response is looking at the behavior of the malware to go, that's not how humans really act. And A plus B plus C here predicts that this is actually malware, and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to block the connection. I'm going to inhibit the transfer of information east to west in the network. That is so important for protecting against phishing, because, or I should say, protecting after phishing occurs. But ultimately, to protect against phishing, you got to have security awareness training. You got to do those phishing exercises. And you also want to incorporate, if you use Office 365, you want to incorporate the security capability there, the filtering of emails, and the URL validation that is embedded in there. Does that make sense?
Definitely makes sense. We have a lot of questions. Do you want to take just a few?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and let's do another before I go into the third one.
Okay. How about, and you also answered one of Ed P's questions, so I put Ed's name in the bowl. And then here's the next question. How do you, let's see, what's the most stubborn objection? And this is from John Bravo. What's the most stubborn objection you're getting when you try to explain to a executive team or end user that they need to take security training, and how do you get past those objections?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the hardest thing is getting people to recognize in an organization the value of training. So there's two things I really point to. One is I try to align the loss from a dollars and cents perspective. So for example, from a phishing activity, one of the most common things that happens is changing the bank account information in invoicing. And so if I'm talking to executives who say, I don't want to do this, it's showing what the cost could be for an organization where they don't do the training. From if the obstacle is tied to the time it takes, I agree. I hate 30-minute trainings. So I try to do 5 minutes, 6 minutes, really short, that everybody can do. And it has some level of entertainment to it so that it's in snippets to it. And then the last thing that I always try to show is the value, the science behind how you reduce the likelihood of a threat occurring through the control. And so, as I mentioned before, security awareness training has the greatest ROI. The reason I know that is I work with an analytics firm that looks at the top 20 threats from a security industry perspective, and the controls, when they're applied, how it reduces those threats and equates that into monetary terms. The company's called X Analytics, if you want to check them out. The thing that they realize is 6 out of the top 10 are remediated and their liability reduced through security awareness training. It's the only control that actually hits that many of the top threats to an organization. I hope that was helpful. It was a good question. So there's one other item here. So we talked about 29% and 52%. So now we're at, excuse me, we're now here at the top 2, which is really 81% of the ransomware attacks. So, but the third is public facing applications. So if an organization has a web app that's available, that's the third way they enter. And so it's important for an organization to incorporate true vulnerability management where you're scanning continuously, continuous being once a month, as well as taking advantage of a web application firewall on any web application so that you reduce the risk there. At the same time, that managed the managed detection and response for your perimeter is so important. And as I said before, multi-factor auth. If you're going to administer that web application and you're going to do it remotely, make sure you have multi-factor auth enabled. This is 98% of the way ransomware attacks occur. If you mitigate these three, you have significantly reduced the likelihood of you being ransomed. And that approach is really how you make an impact, doing these synergistic controls. A real world example of that is looking at endpoints and how do you achieve an endpoint security outcome? Because it always starts really with patching. You know, it's not the malware protection that's first, it's patching systems and having a standard consistent way of doing that patching. And then you throw the AV or next gen AV on there. But if you don't have EDR, endpoint detection and response, where you're looking at the behavior of the malware, you have a major gap to your protection at the endpoint. And it inhibits you from getting to that outcome. But this is all tools and processes that we talked about, but we've got 3 different alerts that we're going to get associated with our security controls, whether it's patching and having a system out of patch, whether it's a virus that's defined, or looking at malicious malware. That's where MDR is so important, so that you get fast time to detect and even faster time to respond. And then comes something like DNS security. Let's make sure that the users aren't allowed to go to known bad sites. You got it on your firewall as well, but let's also stop it from an endpoint perspective. Because as we all know, a lot of us are working from home. We're not going through corporate firewall. So how do you make sure this endpoint is protected when we're all remote? And that's where something like having DNS security on the endpoint is so valuable. And then that training piece. That training piece is so important. And that's how you get an outcome of a secure endpoint. What other questions do we have, Sonia?
Okay, so some good questions. Ed had some more questions on, so you answered his 2-layer security or multi-factor authentication. Do you recommend strong and effective password policies? And how do you implement those? Maybe with a password manager? What are your suggestions there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Was that Ed, by the way? Is that who asked
Ed
that
again?
one?
Yeah.
Man, Ed, great question. After security awareness training, my second personal addition I would put into any organization is standard password managers for all users, at a minimum for administrators, but ultimately for all users. Because the reality is most people have 3 or 4 passwords. That's a reality. And we don't realize how many accounts we have. Now, I've been using a password manager since 2012. I have over 700 accounts that I've created since 2012. Might go 700, that's just crazy. What the heck are you doing, Jonathan? But think of it. Whenever you have a new job, you have 4, 5, 10 accounts that you have with that new job, whether you're talking about a 401k, your HR work, perhaps it's associated with access to the network. But then you have things like any type of your bank accounts, business that you work at as an individual. Perhaps it's also in the community. If you ever have, let's say, access to a gym and your gym membership has a user ID and password, that comes into play. Everything you've bought in the last 5 years probably has a user ID and password. And so you quickly collect an enormous amount of accounts. And when that data breach happens, how do you recall, A, which password did I have there? B, what other systems did I have that had that password? And C, how do I go about changing those passwords? It's really difficult. So password manager is personal preference and absolute that an organization should have. Now but universally, it starts with that training. And so I always go after training right away. And training is my number one. I'm going to die on that hill getting training implemented that's consistent and maintained throughout the year through phishing exercises.
Great. Okay, Paul has a question, and this is, how do you get rid of phishing emails? And I think this one was specifically about they're getting some impersonating the CEO. My response would be just get rid of the CEO. No, I'm just kidding. What's your response, Jonathan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know of a company that just had smishing, where it's with SMS, so texts that went to groups of folks at the company where it looked like it was coming from the CEO saying, hey, I need information right now. Please click on this and send it to me. And the way that this is measured was urgency. I need this right now. And then second is authority. I'm the CEO, do what I say. And it's really important that organizations recognize you can't prevent that from occurring. Like this is all coming in from the outside. You can't prevent that. So this is where that security awareness training is so important. I know that my CEO is never going to text me with urgency and an attachment or a link. And if he does, I need to pick up the phone and call him. And that's what's so important. Validate, validate, validate. So for that specific example about having an email, how do you stop those from occurring where they're impersonating the CEO? You're never going to stop them. And that's why that security awareness training is so important. And you get in our mindset to validate before I do anything.
Yeah, great. This question is from Daryl. Daryl says, what would be the best layered approach to building a robust cyber threat game plan from US to remote international locations and vice versa?
That's a very
just
question.
Answer that in 30 seconds.
That's pretty good. Well, you know, I used to work with a global bank that had over 20 large offices, and they had a significant WAN. And they needed to have a cybersecurity program that could assess the security to policy across the globe, recognizing that process can be unique in each community, culture, and office. And so they needed a standard program, which started with the leadership in the organization who had governance view. Then that leadership team, the leadership who has governance, needed to sanction an assessment program to assess the security globally at all these different sites. It was done in full transparency, so everybody was a part of it, with the ultimate goal of all of us becoming more secure. And that transparency is so very important, because when you're doing this assessment and then the remediation, you want the collaboration. So it was at this organization, we incorporated at each of the major global locations a stakeholder who was someone in the organization who acted as a collaborating resource internally at that location through this assessment. And then with that assessment is remediation, the actual means of remediation, and having a tool, a solution that gives transparency to the state of each site, the controls that were found, the findings of them, and the remediation activity, and then doing that in a continuous manner. I hope that's helpful. Happy to talk to you about that in greater detail.
Definitely one of those "it depends" questions that takes, planning and, partners such as yourself to get in there and work with each individual client who has those needs. So we'd love to take that question offline and kind of go into those uniques. But I love the stories. Gilles says, are there detectable signs that can be seen as advanced warnings in an attack on the network?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on the attack, but we get calls all the time from customers saying, my network is so slow, I have got to get more bandwidth. They want to increase the bandwidth, the pipe to their office. And so we always ask them, what's changed? Do you have more customers? Do you have more programs? Do you have more business partners? What was the change that occurred? And did this drastic change of network saturation happen in a recent time frame? Because often case when you are owned, your network resources are being used for other things. So performance is definitely one. Additionally, there's the call, and everybody hates the call. The call from a business partner, the call from a credit card organization, the call from the bank, or a vendor who says, where's my payment? Or your customers we're seeing fraud associated with your customers, or we're seeing that other people are sending us information with your domain. Those instances where you're getting calls from business partners where there's somebody in the middle that has actually occurred and had a problem, you've had a loss. That's one. But then there's something you can do proactively. With our managed perimeter solution, we're looking for data leakage. Because if data is leaving the network that is sensitive data format, whether it's credit card information, address information, social security information, but of certain standard framework, if it's leaving, and if it's leaving to an unknown source, a new, different source, it's likely that you have a loss. So we're constantly looking for the leakage, stopping it, and then determining what's the root cause of it. I hope some of those things were helpful for you, because the reality is sometimes you don't get the call. Sometimes you don't know ahead of time and you just get lost.
Stays there. Yep. Good question from Cal. We have a lot, and folks, I'm sorry, we're probably not going to be able to get to all of them, but Cal says, what are your best practices for Wi-Fi security? Good question.
Cal, great question. Wi-Fi security is often overlooked, but man, that is so important to secure. There's a lot of different best practices here. First off, there's a difference between Wi-Fi for guests and Wi-Fi for users, and making sure that you have that delineation. Secondly, is all the security controls that you put in for your corporate wired network, you do want to have on your wireless network. So you want to have visibility to the traffic on the wireless network. You want to make sure that you have restrictions, and that's where you put, let's say, access through the firewall to what people can access and where they can come in and go out through that wireless network. You also want to have controls associated with who can connect to that wireless network, what the minimum configuration requirement is for the wireless network. And then you then have the pieces tied to the security controls on that wireless network. The long answer, or the short answer, is very similar controls to what you do for a wired network, but it gets more complex because you also have that guest network, which comes into play as well. Happy to talk about that in greater detail.
Okay, and then Ed has a specific question on extended detection and response as a what are your thoughts on utilizing this as an additional line of defense? I don't know how technical we want to get here, but I think that is a good question, or at least to touch on.
Yeah, no, it is. Like there's a company out there called Darktrace that has a nice, cool little solution. Extended detection and response. First off, it's another marketing term, just like managed detection and response, but it has some validity. It's basically saying, let me get detection and response where I think that remediation. That's a really important piece here. If there's not remediation as part of it, you're just talking about another notification process. As much as we try to spin things from a vendor, if you don't have remediation where you are eliminating the threat, it's not helping you further, no matter what the view is. But XDR is basically saying across the entire network, in the cloud, in your wired network, the wireless network, your business partners, on systems, in network, having that detection and response across all of that, so you can truly see the threat as it propagates and traverses the network, doing the remediation. I think it has validity. The question is, can you afford it? The question is, do you need it based on your risk to your organization? And then ultimately, does it incorporate that remediation? Because without remediation, it's just another alert.
Yeah. Remediation, it's so important, even from a compliance standpoint, because as an analyst or an auditor, if I see that you have gotten notifications of threats that you just ignored, you're going to have a greater chance of getting fined and bigger fines, because you knew that there was a problem and yet you did nothing. So getting these notifications isn't always the way to go, unless you, like you said, Jonathan, you do have that remediation in place. Otherwise, you're just stacking up the fines against yourself.
Yeah.
So a question from Ed. We don't have a few more minutes. Ed's got another really good one, though, about insider threats, and how do you suggest the best way to mitigate against those? Because those wouldn't be training, right? That's right. From a compliance standpoint, I would say, the minimum necessary policy would be applied to everyone. But what else can we do from a cybersecurity standpoint?
No, that's a great point. And let's be honest, security is as old as mankind, if you will. I mean, the insider threat has been around since the beginning. And so there's no difference with cybersecurity. There's a couple key things that I would highlight, but this is a broader conversation, obviously. The first one is I would absolutely incorporate the principle of least privilege to your business, which means I only have access to what I need based on my role. And it's really important to have your business limiting access into systems, networks, and data based on business use. So that's one thing, principle of least privilege. Second thing I'd highlight is as your security program becomes more mature, I'd highly recommend using user analytics, user entity analytics, whether we're talking about UEBA or we're talking about some other analytics solution. I would look at users forming that baseline of what they do normally in their job and have that baseline as a means to find the anomaly. In security, I'm always after the anomaly because the anomaly is the fastest way to detect. And so I'm looking for the anomaly. Most insider threats, they didn't start out as an insider threat, they became one. And so you can form a baseline of user behavior. And when you detect the anomaly, whether it's trying to access data that it usually doesn't access, whether it's connecting at a time that it doesn't usually connect, or downloading data that it doesn't usually do, if you can find that anomaly, you can get faster detection. And then the last thing I'd offer here is insider threats are as much access to data as it is to enabling others to access that data. And so there are technologies out there that validate identity in multiple different ways. And one of the things that I really like, there's a solution out there that looks, you still have user ID and password, but it looks at how the password is typed. When we type a very certain way because we type this way all the time. And so again, it looks at that, how we type, and forms a baseline of that behavior so that if someone types it different, it flags, which is often the case because sometimes an insider threat isn't actually doing the work. They just been given someone else the access. And so you want to be able to validate the identity and capture the anomaly in that identity. More we could talk about there, Ed, but I hope those are some ideas for you.
Those are really good. I like that last one. I'd never heard of that. I love that. Okay, so would you like to continue on? I see this one more thing and I'm curious.
Yeah, I've got one more thing, but before we leave, if you don't, why don't we do well, I'll do my one thing and then I'll give it back to you, Simon. That works best. So the one more thing is whenever I talk about security, I always want people to realize that security, yeah, it's technical, but it's really a business problem. And if you don't take security seriously, if you do take it seriously, but your business doesn't take it seriously, there can be drastic results. And those results aren't something you can see coming. Because the last thing we want is we want to have this image on our systems. And this is a true ransomware note, an old one, but a true one. And the reason I think this is so valuable in its reality is when this happens, it's real. And at that moment, a clock starts and it says, pay me by date, time, or I release your data. Pay me in Bitcoin, or I will make it where you have no access to your systems. And at that moment, you have to make a decision. And part of that decision is, do I know how to get Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin is not going down the street, hitting your ATM, or going to the Bank of America and saying, hey, I need to take this $150,000 and convert it to Bitcoin, please. Thank you. So you need to either know how to do that, which I'm not condoning doing that activity. That's an individual business decision. But if you don't take security seriously, or your company doesn't take security seriously, you're in this position, and then your company has to decide what to do. And it's so much better to decide what to do before. Know, how are you going to respond when this happens? Who do I contact? Who is my legal counsel? Do I have cyber insurance, and what is their contact information? Who is responsible for communicating to my customers, to the public? Do I have to report this to authorities based on where I reside and do business and my customers are? This is a very scary place to be. And if you aren't prepared, it makes it for weeks of no sleep. And frankly, that thing that keeps you up at night. With that, Sonia, I'll hand back to you. And I certainly thank everyone for their time.
All right, thank you. Let's do our drawing. We had a lot of good questions, and we will get back to you if we didn't get your question answered today. I'll make sure we get a report of those over to the team. I started looking. A bad thing. It's just instinctive. You want to look at what you're touching. Okay. We have. It was Ed P. I'm not surprised. There was like probably 5 in there. So good job. Great questions, Ed. Congratulations. And yay, Christine. And thank you, Richard, for joining us, and Mark. Thank you so much to TPX for helping us put this on. I found there was a lot of good information. Jonathan, great job. We will be back in 2 weeks with another Technology Source Virtual Roundtable. Thank you to the many audience members who joined today. It was great to see a lot of returning names, and we hope to have you again in 2 weeks. Thanks for all the thanks and the chats, and we'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.